Before we begin, just a quick note. The views and opinions shared by our guests on the Prison Pharmacy Connect show are entirely their own. We're simply providing a platform for open conversation, and nothing discussed should be taken as legal, medical, or professional advice. Today we have Amina, who's going to be joining us. Hi, Amina. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. My name's Amina. I was one of the very unfortunate ones to be given an IPP sentence. IPP basically means indeterminate for public protection, which means you don't have a release date. You get given a time period. Mine was 18 months. After 18 months, you have to apply to a parole board, and it's up to the parole board to decide whether or not you are safe to be released. The IPP has now been abolished because it was an inhumane sentence applied to me at that time. You have to go to a parole board. I got a fair few knockbacks, which is why I ended up doing about 8 years in prison in different establishments up and down the country. So I've got bit of experience with regards to prisons and different establishments. But since I have been released, I've been working in the health and justice sector and in mental health. At the moment, I am a lived experience advisor for NHS England in the health and justice department. Anything that is lived experience related is my passion, because I have seen with my own eyes and experienced different experiences throughout HMPPS, and for me it's a case of making those strategic changes, because there's a lot of changes that need to take place. The system just didn't make sense for me to appeal any of the hearings, because the opportunity to sit another hearing would be 18 months, but if I appeal it, it's 2 years. So it really didn't make sense for me to appeal any of the knockbacks that I had. I always just wanted the chance to be released, and then it's on my head whether or not I stay out. It was very, very, very difficult just to stay positive. Outside wise, your life changes, people pass away. I experienced the loss of both my parents whilst I was inside, so it was extremely difficult.
And what support did you have?
Very little to none, in all honesty. I think there was more support from the Muslim chaplain. Apart from that, very little to none. Even when you experience death in prison, whether natural or by suicide, there's very little support. It's business as usual. You're not really seen as anybody who has feelings and emotions. This literally happened to me, where the whole wing was locked up. There's somebody who has passed away, and all you're hearing is noises. You're not unlocked because obviously there's an incident happening. The women are shouting to each other, trying to play some games and looking through the tiniest gaps to see what is going on. So nobody is actually notified at the time. I know from experience how long it takes for the coroner to come and remove the person. The whole day is usually disrupted, and you have no clue what's going on. It's not until the following day that you find out what's going on. It's the women talking to each other. That's how we find out what's going on the wing. And when you're in such close proximity, you can't ignore things like that, even when you've been a friend of that person, because you do become friends. It's difficult to deal with that bereavement. In my experience, 9 times out of 10, it's usually the chaplain who approach and who actually hold a service. But again, you've got people who are atheists and don't have any belief, and yet your gathering is always in a chapel setting. Different people deal with grief in different ways. In the establishments I've been at, there was little to no support for that loss, to be honest.
Did you seek support?
For me, yes, I tried, but the resources are limited. You don't have anything like bereavement support. As my dad passed away when I was incarcerated, it took for me pestering and badgering to have a greyside visit. With regards to healthcare, there was no support whatsoever around loss and bereavement. But they too so far stretched, it's unbelievable. And the priority always lied with those that required reports to be written for the parole hearing. If you're an IPP prisoner or a lifer, they take priority, I think, against anybody else completely. Usually, if you have a determinate sentence, 9 times out of 10, you won't be in touch with or have any interventions or support from psychologists, psychiatrists, because it's not a requirement for a parole hearing. So anybody I came across, never, unless you were IPP or lifers, because those services extremely full with waiting lists. So it's not a case of a quick, we can get in there and it's readily available. I mean, because I was IPP, I did have psychologists and psychiatrists, but again, each one was a wait of more than 6 months at least. And because of the requirement for the parole hearing, it wasn't intervention per se, it was just to have a report written so that you can present that in front of the parole board. For me, because I was IPP sentenced, certain courses and interventions were made priority for me because of my sentence. So I undertook the therapeutic community. I was on that for just over a year and a half. In that community, there were about 30 people on there. Not a single one of them was a determinate sentence prisoner. They were either IPP or a lifer, because you prioritize those that require it for the parole hearing or for the parole board. That's how far stretched those interventions are in the first place, basically.
You mentioned that you had been through a lot of prisons during your sentencing. It's for someone's perspective in the community, every time you go into A&E, for example, you have to state what your healthcare concerns are, then you're discharged and you go back into A&E, you have to repeat the same thing again. Was that similar to what it was like for you when you were going through different prisons?
It was similar but worse. I am based in the north and the TC was in the south, meaning the therapeutic communities. It took a whole week because the prison vans only travel so many miles and you have to stop. So I left on the Monday. I didn't get to the establishment that did the TC until Friday. Each time, even though it was one night, the staff knew I was a transfer prisoner. I would have to go through reception in exactly the same way as if somebody was stopping at that establishment. So you had the questions from the prison staff with regards to your property and that kind of thing. And I also saw medical staff, a health nurse, each and every establishment, even though I was stopping for one night. It was pretty much the same questions each time. The healthcare questions are very, very similar, whereas the HMPP ones, they vary a fair bit as well. I wasn't on any medication when I was traveling. I was so fortunate that I wasn't on any medication, because again, it's like you go into a new establishment and you're starting from scratch all over again, rather than the information being sent from one to the other, which I would say that that's the more convenient way to do it all round, because it's the same person traveling and certain documents follow that person. If for some reason the system didn't talk to each other regarding the medication, there were women who actually did say that I went to so-and-so place and they didn't give me them back. At the reception, when you're booking in, they have to wait to see the doctor to have that medication prescribed all over again. It was just very disjointed. That's why I said I was extremely fortunate and glad that I wasn't on any medication whilst I was travelling down, because it just gets lost in the system.
It does vary prison to prison, but from my personal experience, it was clearly written in the notes that this individual is transferring, they're staying here overnight, as it were. And on that basis, it was almost like we had to make a decision. If we take the meds away from that person, we have to make sure that they get them back. because if they don't have them back, we're leaving that person without meds whilst they're on their journey.
Absolutely.
And it's a break in that care, and that shouldn't be the aim. But that's interesting to hear that you have noticed that from other prisons. And like you said, it is about systems, people talking to each other. Communication is so important.
Absolutely.
And whilst we do have it on our records that this individual is being transferred, or whether they be there just for the night, at the end of the day, if someone comes to the prison, we have to do those checks again. I know that can be tiresome and exhausting for yourself if you're the one traveling, having to repeat the same thing again, but it's also that duty of care or that healthcare department that they have to ask the same questions. So I can see how that can be quite frustrating. During your time in prison, were you prescribed any medicine at all?
I did need medication. I had antibiotics at one point, waiting in the medication queue. You have to be down quite early and there's a wait. There are some medications you can have in possession and those that are dispensed at the hatch. It wasn't a nice experience. If you take a long time or serving you is taking a long time, the other women are getting frustrated and irate. It becomes sort of your fault. So you want to try and get in there as quick as soon as, especially the women on methadone. They can be impatient, even though they know that it's not your fault, as it were. And you're holding up the queue. It has to be quite a quick turnaround. So at one point, I was on antibiotics, and because I don't usually have a prescription or go for medication, it took quite some time for the nurse to find my medication. I had a queue of 7 to 8 women just chatting away. They were fine to begin with, and then it turned that they all sort of were looking at me and giving me like nasty looks and saying, she's taking forever. And it became my fault when it wasn't even my fault, because I'm just waiting for my medication. It doesn't stop there, because now I've made all those people who are in that queue late. It's not that the nurse has made them late because she couldn't find my medication. I've made them late to go to the activities. So for example, I'm working in gardens. There's myself and another one who was in the queue. We both go to gardens. That now gets told to all the women who are in the gardens. It's because of her that we were late. Those conversations would have happened at different workplaces as well. You would have quite a lot of distaste from the other women. If you go down for meds the next day, pretty much the same thing. Oh, it's her again. Because you're living in such close proximity, it doesn't just stop you getting medication, and it then perpetuates for the whole day. So I know the nurse who is dispensing that medication doesn't realize the dynamics behind the scenes, that it's not just a case of getting your medication. If you hold up the queue, how is that then gonna affect this individual?
It's very interesting to say that, because when I go into the dispensary and I notice that my colleagues are dispensing medications to people, I try not to disrupt them, because I know that there's people waiting. I've had people say to me, oh, miss, I need to go for a shower, or miss, if I don't get back on time, I won't be able to shower, or I need to go to this place and go to that. And I get it. There are times where I do have to go to that, and I do have to address something in that moment, or I just wait until they finish medicating someone. If there's a line of people waiting, it's the same for anything. If we're waiting in a queue for something, we're going to get frustrated and irritated if someone is taking ages.
Absolutely.
So it's just about understanding from the flip side.
Absolutely. In comparison to that, what you just said, I was out on COVID, but you don't see that person again. That's the difference. You do not see those people that were in that queue again. Whereas with healthcare and prison meds, you will see those people again at some point during the day. That's the added layer, if you like, because it's not just being that morning thing. It's actually transferred into your whole day, if not more. It's things like that, because our time as a prisoner is restricted in that you've got to do this, and like you said, go to your activity or wherever you're working. It's not that we're being impatient, it's because our time is restricted. There were many times I just needed a paracetamol, and it's not a case of just going to a pharmacy and getting a paracetamol. I'd just ride out the pain, because when I was on prescription for a short period of time, that experience itself told me what the medication queue looked like and what the issues that can transpire from there. So I would rather suffer in silence than go down for medication. The antibiotics that I were given weren't allowed in possession. I don't usually do medication anyway. It was a case of restrictions around certain ones that are allowed in possession. Nobody is allowed paracetamol in possession.
It does vary which prison you go to and how it works in different prisons, depending on their possession status.
Absolutely. That's what differs, because the establishment I spend most of my time, you weren't allowed paracetamols in possession due to high rate of trading going on. I mean, I'm not a medication sort of person. I don't know the different names of meds, but I could tell you tramadol. You know, why do I know the name tramadol? I learned that one from inside, and women were concealing and trading tramadol. Things like that do happen. The establishments do need to be very careful with certain medications. The one I was at, nobody was allowed even paracetamol in possession at all. I would rather suffer in silence. And you can't buy it off canteen as well. So there was a lot of this, well, when you're out, you can buy it in the shop, so why can't you buy it off canteen? I would have rather bought it off canteen than go in that medication queue for a paracetamol.
There is this debate about buying paracetamol on the canteen. It's ongoing. I've heard it for a few years now. It varies which establishment you're in. The risks, the patient population, the fact that we're in a prison where people don't have control over anything. They've lost that freedom. So people's mental health is quite low as well.
Yeah.
So it's just balancing a lot of things. If it's not available in the canteen, some establishments might allow it to be prescribed and people will have it in possession, because in that way, at least healthcare are aware of what's being given. Some people may not want it in possession regardless.
I think another added layer to those challenges, for example, you do have it in possession. Now you're that individual who is in possession, let's go with paracetamol because it's over the counter. The women know that I've got this in possession basically because they've overheard in the meds queue. That puts me at higher risk of somebody coming and asking me for a medication. I've got a really bad headache. Well, go on, and I know that you've got paracetamol, just give me one. You get that basically, right? But then I also know that I'm now gonna get into a hell of a lot of trouble if I give a paracetamol to somebody, because it's trading, even though it's only a paracetamol, it's not prescribed to them, it's prescribed to me. So it puts that individual at higher risk, and I've seen it before. It's very difficult to keep things secret in prison, especially in the meds queue, because there is no privacy. If somebody finds out that you've been prescribed medication and you've got it in possession, you now become a target. There was one of the women was concealing her tramadol and would trade it later. I saw that happening many times. In a different establishment where I did the therapeutic community, you were allowed in possession medication, paracetamols and so forth. And there was a lady there who had tramadol in possession. She was high up on the list for trading. I just want to get off my face. They had tobacco. It was a case of trading tobacco, double bubble. It's not until canteen would come that they would do the trade-off. To be honest, I saw people trading all sorts, from chocolates to anything. Some people don't get private funds coming from home. Even a tin of tuna can be part of the trading, and it adds a whole new layer to things, and that's prescribed medication. But then the flip side is the illegal substances that they are trading under the radar, and that's very prevalent in prisons. There's a lot of different factors to take into consideration, and I totally understand that. Thankfully, I wasn't on any long time medications or had any in possession medication as well, and I chose to continue to do that to keep myself safe and not as a target. The pressure from the women is even people who have the best of intentions give in, because it is constant pressure. I've seen women, it's usually your older women actually who put people in the place and say, no, it's not happening, go away. So you end up giving in just for an easier life, to be honest. The stockpiling does happen for certain things. I've always got paracetamol, but if somebody asks me, even to this day, if I'm at work or somebody's got a headache or whatever else, or somebody asks me for paracetamol, ibuprofen, I don't give it. I do not give it, because it's drilled into me. That's trading. It stayed with me, because with an indeterminate prison centre, you're always on edge about doing something wrong which can work against you. One of the things is trading medication. I could have got knocked back on a parole hearing for that alone. So that's the level we're talking, basically. Therefore, whilst being an IPP prisoner, I was extremely careful with things that would work against me, in overthinking it to the point where I just wouldn't do, because I'm now jeopardizing my freedom. That's in a nutshell what it turned out to be. If somebody's asking me for meds, it's either I give you meds or it's my freedom. I choose the latter. Things that they can get themselves over the counter, because then my head goes into, well, actually, that's trading. How do I know that you're not allergic to it? If you have a reaction to it, it's going to be my fault because I've given it to you.
Your survival instincts are still kicking in to this day.
The impact is absolutely next level. And I don't think people realize the ongoing impact from that, because that was traumatic in itself. There is no after support for the traumas that you've experienced in prison. I come from a South Asian background. My family think I've been on holiday for that long, because again, it's a taboo thing where you just don't talk about prison at all. It's done, dusted, and move on. I'll always be known as the one that went to prison. It's the trauma around the prison experience, especially from an ethnic minority background. It's just really difficult to navigate even to this day.
And what support would you feel would be beneficial, particularly for people from ethnic minority backgrounds? What would be beneficial when coming out of prison?
I think from a health perspective, it's about understanding the full picture rather than just the system side of things, basically. So it's not just about roof over your head and so forth. It's the cultural differences. So it's very different for a female who's been to prison compared to a South Asian female being to prison compared to a male, because the honor and the shame and things like that all plays a massive role in things. I've known people who've had to relocate because of the stigma and bad treatment after they've been released. They've served the time, but it's like a new sentence all over again. But I've been very fortunate in the way I navigated that, because I didn't go back to the community I grew up in. I stepped away and got myself on my feet. I got a roof on my head, got a job, things like that, and then started to go back. There are things that you cannot celebrate, even though it's a huge achievement. At one point, whilst I was on the license for the IPP, I was invited to participate in a conference at the Supreme Court in London. And to me, that was an absolute next level achievement. I'm still on an IPP sentence. I'm going to stand in the highest court in the land. Yet I couldn't openly celebrate, because again, he's the one who's been to prison. It's something that's never mentioned out loud, and it's never allowed to be mentioned out loud, if you like. I've done a fair bit of volunteering and prison-related work. I've been back as an inspirational speaker. With time, I've learned that this is part of my healing from that trauma. It's tapping into my lived experience of prisons, but I can't do that in the way I want to. I can't openly talk about it with my support network, as in my family, but it's my passion, because I've seen the systems that don't work, and I'm really passionate about making those positive changes, but it's also part of my healing process. I won't say that I'm still healed, to be honest with you. It's only just recently that I've stopped saying I'm on a return ticket. And even to this day, if I've got a police car behind me, it gives me anxiety. I'd rather pull up on the side and let the police car go rather than have them behind me. I know that it's got nothing to do with me or not coming for me, but it is just that level of anxiety. And then there are times where I've actually been to police stations to attend a meeting and so forth. I have to mentally prepare. Nobody else knows that, but I know how much of a big deal it was for me. I know what works for me and what doesn't, and a lot of that is down to the therapeutic community. I would say that it should be available to not just IPP and lifers, but to anybody and everybody, because majority of my experiences has been the women that I've come across. Not a single one of them hasn't been through some form of trauma or abuse. These sort of courses are not made available to somebody who's got a 2-year sentence. So you're literally killing time, as it were. That trauma is deep-rooted and entrenched, and until you unravel those roots, figure it out and work on them, it's always going to be a repetition, because that person doesn't know any different.
The course that you did, the teaching was, what was that exactly?
It's called Therapeutic Community. You're living with about 26 to 30 people. You are broken into small groups where you have a psychologist, psychiatrist directly working with you. There's usually groups of 6 to 7 individuals. Then you also have community days, and community days are everybody together. We had 4 groups, and each group had about 6 to 7 individuals. You are required to open up about your experiences, not just the crime, but all your life experiences, what's brought you here today.
Okay.
Right? Part of it is that you speak about your crime as well. For example, you're in a group of 6. You've got the facilitator, and you've got the other 5 women. Now you're telling your darkest secrets to these people. Then you're getting different perspectives from each person, including the therapist, but also working through that. So it's giving you the whole picture. Now that's in your small groups. Those groups were usually 2 to 3 times a week. Then the other 2 days was the full community. When it's a full community, everybody, including all the therapists, sit in a circle and say how you're feeling. You are not allowed to say I am fine. You have to go through how you're feeling. You are pulled up about your behaviors in that community as well. So you've got another 20, 25 people watching your behaviors, and anybody can go to the chair, and it's one of the women who is a chair and a deputy chair. So if somebody comes to that chair and says, put this in, I want to bring this up, please, they have to write it in the diary to say, you're going to bring this up. Your behaviors are mirrored back to you, and you get questioned in front of everybody. You've got to justify your actions in front of everyone. The smaller ones are more about you and where you are at and more personal stuff. The bigger ones are more about what society sees and what public see, basically. It is extremely, extremely intense.
That's very deep, and it can be emotionally draining, but at the same time, it can be quite healing, because it's parts of a person that maybe someone has decided not to look at, they shut out because they didn't know they had that part, or they never felt safe to speak about it. That seems a useful therapeutic way to help people to see things differently and have better understanding of themselves.
But at the time, you don't understand it like that. When I was in it, I didn't. Because listening, and one particular lady, I said, why am I having to listen to this? I've never been exposed to anything like that. I don't want to. Looking back at it, yes, I had my little say, and it was important for me to have my voice and deal with those emotions. And why is it that I flipped out like that as well? You think it's easy to do, but it's extremely difficult to listen to somebody else's, I call it a journey rather than a story, but then you get the whole picture of what's going on, and you're helping that individual to work through it themselves and to look at it from a third person's point of view as well.
It is intense, but I often wonder to what extent therapy can be useful. You know, as a pharmacist, we do look at things from medicine's perspective, and sometimes people don't want to talk about these things with others or anyone because they just feel that I'm not going to be in prison for long, I'm not going to open up about my life to anyone. So they settle for a quick fix, which is medicines. To what extent is that individual actually getting relief from the medicines? I understand why they're opting for that, but then at what point do you get the help that you need to overcome that trauma as well? So those are just some things that I look at as a pharmacist. Seeing another prescription for an antidepressant, is that really going to help this person? But it's a personal choice, isn't it, at the end of the day?
I think both interventions need to work hand in hand alongside each other. I think antidepressant, that's fine, but what's the root cause? I think that's where the therapy comes in. Had it not been requirement for me to get my freedom, I probably wouldn't have opted to do the TC. It was either I do this for my freedom or I just sit another parole hearing and hope they give me my parole. I didn't get my parole anyway, but it was at the time where the honour killings were high up on the agenda. I got questioned about that at the parole hearing. In the recommendations, the knockback, it said, not just for the safety of others, but for your own safety too. The parole thought I was in danger if I was released, but they're judging me by something that's in the media at that time rather than me and my circumstances and my journey. So it's again that whole assumption, because this is happening to a brown Asian person, therefore she's done the same and ran away from home and had to get away from family, and she's brown as well, so we'll keep her in. You know, it's that generalizing, whereas my situation was completely different. But it's things like that had it not been that I was pretty much forced into doing, I wouldn't have done. And again, if I was on a indeterminate sentence, would I have chosen to do that? No, I wouldn't, because it is so difficult, extremely difficult. I've got a friend who is going through therapy at the minute. She's chosen to do it. She's got everything else to juggle as well, the family dynamics, kind of all the rest of it. For me, my life came to a standstill and I could just focus on my recovery and the therapy side of things. Absolutely.
And were these sessions led by the prison psychologists as opposed to the healthcare psychologists?
I'm trying to think what badge they were, because usually the badge tells you. It wasn't HMPPS, they were external, but we had HMPPS staff assigned to TC to facilitate some of them.
Yeah, it's not something I've heard of, but it reminds me of this docu-film that came out quite recently, Holloway, about women who've gone back to Holloway prison, and they also had quite a trauma-informed therapeutic approach. So that's sort of what it's reminded me of.
I just hope that people get an overall picture of the health system within prisons. It's a very difficult place to navigate because you're working from one system in another, if that makes sense. So you've got the healthcare within HMPPS. They have to work with each other, not against each other. So, for example, I've seen where one of the prisoners had an outside appointment, as in to go to the hospital outside. It was cancelled because they didn't have HMPPS staff to facilitate that. So they need to work together to enable care for that individual. In my experience, you've got systems working within systems and everybody's working in silos. I think there needs to be much more joint working and collaboration across the board, because you're talking about an individual, not different parts of an individual, whereas the focus seems to be different parts of an individual, basically. I recently was involved with the NHS 10-year plan and giving my feedback there.
Wow.
But again, it's things like diet. They're looking at prevention methods and so forth. My feedback on that is, if you're looking at prevention, for example, diet, you cannot do that alone without HMPPS staff. HMPPS staff are the ones who run the kitchens or provide the food and so forth. If you're telling people that this is a healthy way of eating, but yet you're providing food that is unhealthy, that's mixed messages. I'll be honest with you, I've never had that many potatoes in my life until I went to prison. So you've got potatoes in every different form, whether it is chips, mashed potato, fry, round fries, waffle, anything and everything is potato based. It's very carb heavy. Some of these women have never had a different lifestyle. They don't know any different. If you're giving information sessions on healthy eating, but yet providing unhealthy food, it just won't work and it will never make sense, basically. And that's because it doesn't help to work in silos. You need to work collaboratively to reach a goal, whatever that goal may be. Healthcare needs to work collaboratively with HMPPS, because just by the nature of it, you are positioned within HMPPS's establishment. So they have to work collaboratively to provide the best care and support for those individuals who are going through the system right now.
Thank you so much. It's been great speaking, sharing some of your vulnerabilities as well.
You're very welcome, and it's been a pleasure. Part of my healing process is to reflect back. It shows me how far I've come from there.